Hey, this is Alex from Los Angeles.
This is Karen from San Francisco. Welcome to Movies That Shaped Us, a journey of self-discovery through a shared love of film. We're two longtime friends who grew up on opposite ends of the globe with very different backgrounds, but we were both shaped and are still being shaped by the love of movies, what we see. In each episode, we'll cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through three of our favorite movies. We hope these movies and topics are fun and revelatory to you, just like they've been for us. So, Alex, what's our topic for the day?
So, our topic for this episode is movies that shaped our love of film scores. Now, both of us are big fans of film scores and music. And what we are doing here, Oscars are coming up. This is one of our favorite categories. So we figured, okay, well, let's look back and think about those movies that, or the film scores, I should say, that were very influential on us in terms of our love of film score. And just a note, these are scores, these are not soundtracks. So they're not going to be things where including pop songs or things outside of the film. Again, also, these are not going to be our favorite scores of all time. So that could be a whole other episode where we rank that. But this instead is going to be about the scores that really influence our love of that medium. So I'll start with my framework, and then I'd love to hear kind of how you approach this. But yeah, like for me, I've loved scores for a long time, and there's been kind of an evolution for me in terms of my appreciation for different aspects of the film score. I'm a big collector of soundtracks, so I kind of went back and looked at all of the scores that I own and thought about, okay, what are the ones that really resonate with me the most? Maybe the ones that I play the most, or the ones that really kicked off this fascination I had in terms of collecting film scores and appreciating film scores. So I really picked the three for me that are giving like different aspects into why I love film score so much. What about you? How'd you approach this?
Pretty much the same. I feel like for the longest time, when people would ask me like, what is your favorite music or favorite song, I would just name random scores and people would look at me, what are you talking about? So yeah, I've always sort of prioritized scores over even like regular music that's, playing or it's popular at that time. But yeah, I think it was more about, like you said, not favorite scores, but more about thinking about how has these scores really shaped how I've understood storytelling in movies, and how the two kind of bounce off of each other, and why scores are such an integral part of movies the way we know them. So yeah, excited to get into those different aspects with you.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I wish we could do needle drops in this and actually play different tracks as we talk, but we'll just have to have the listeners, unless you wanted to hum along, I don't know, just your favorite melodies. But yeah, let's jump into it. So why don't you kick us off with your number three, a movie that shaped your love of film scores?
All right. So my number three is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, a little movie that you might have heard of. Came out in 2001. Directed by Chris Columbus, written by J.K. Rowling, obviously, starring Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert Grint, the whole gang. Story logline from IMDb: an orphan boy enrolls in a school of wizardry where he learns the truth about himself, his family, and the terrible evil that haunts the magical world. This is the first of the series, scored by John Williams. So I chose this because I would just want to say that I didn't grow up with a lot of the signature John Williams scores. Like I knew of them, but because I was born in India, I was listening to a very different kind of, film music. So I don't really, even though I knew of those scores and those tunes and those movies, I didn't have that kind of relationship. So I think for whatever reason, this is my John Williams score because I was old enough to understand scores, old enough that I'd seen enough movies from Hollywood that I sort of understood the grammar of film scores. So this is kind of the beginning of that for me a little bit. But really what it signifies for me is scores can underline sense of place so beautifully. That's the one big aspect that I really locked into with this score and this with list, this sort of sense of place. So to me, like that main theme that we all know so well, to me, that is kind of it's signature to the movie, it's signature to this world of magic and wizardry, and you're instantly transported to that world. I mean, just imagine this movie if that score
Oh yeah.
was not there. The movie doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that whole scene when you're getting into Hogwarts the very first time with all the candles hanging and such, it doesn't work if you don't have the score. So, you know, transporting you, creating this world of whimsy and magic, disbelief, it's key to the score. But I think this is where the wizardry of, I guess, John Williams comes into
Mm-hmm.
this play as well, is that it's not just that. Like any other composer would just, give you a magical, whimsical score, and that would be that. There's depth to it.
Mm-hmm.
He knows that even though on the surface this is like a fun movie, targeted to kids and what have you, but there are some pretty big themes at play here. Themes of childhood, growing up, finding friends, dealing with loss of family, being in a new place where you're vulnerable, you don't understand what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, there are, literally dark forces at play that you're trying to comprehend. There's a bit of a hero's journey struggle here where
Right.
somebody has to really come into their own being. And watching this movie again recently, I just really locked into that how is the score underlining all of those aspects, but at the same time is very well aware that this movie is about fun and whimsy, and so it's very playful. And I think that is that delicate dance of depth with playfulness that's just so beautifully brought out in the score. And who else than John Williams, who
Oh,
can do that?
totally.
So yeah, that's my number three, Harry Potter, the Sorcerer's Stone.
Yeah, I mean, you hit on a lot of things of why I love John Williams, and maybe we'll talk more about him later too in this episode. But I think with this, really, like he is very good at coming up with themes. And like you said, the iconic theme, which is called Hedwig's theme, I remember that was introduced in the trailer for this movie. And I was not someone, I think I'd even talked about this on a previous episode, was not someone who read the books of Harry Potter before the films. I was not a huge fan, but that song, when it played in that trailer, which sounds so magical, it's like this whole really does build the world through that track. I was enthralled, and I went to that screening of that first midnight show of Harry Potter 1, like with this painted on scar on my forehead, acting like I
Yep.
was a huge fan. And the music, I think, is really a huge part of it. I mean, I bought this soundtrack right afterwards. I even have now like the extended edition soundtrack. It's like 3 discs. And he really just created a lot of amazing themes, which I think is something for me that I do gravitate towards a lot of scores with really important themes. Like you play that Hedwig's theme, and everyone now knows, oh, that's Harry Potter. Like
Yep.
immediately, you just play those first couple notes on the harpsichord or whatever that is, and it's like, oh, I know this is Harry Potter, and the genius of being able to do that. So much so that the marketing team even included it in the trailer. Like they knew how important it was to build a world, this magical world, how important music was going to be in that. And it's one of my favorite scores. Though I prefer the third Potter score that Williams also did actually to this one. I think it brings in a lot of new and more interesting and darker themes while still utilizing Hedwig's theme. But I think this movie is the blueprint for obviously the rest of the entire franchise. He sets up all the major themes there that are used all the way through the last film, where other composers would come in. And they try to add their own elements to it, but that iconic theme you can't get away from. I mean, that's Potter.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But that's also interesting that I didn't think about that the theme is such that it's malleable enough that you can stretch it out in different ways and bring in darker themes, but also represent how the kids grow up and how the world sort of further evolves, which is also pretty genius. So yeah. And on a final note, I would say it just, I don't know if you're going to bring this in this episode, but for me, re-listening to this soundtrack is just my gateway into like a world of happy. So, whenever I don't know, I could be cleaning on a Saturday morning with nothing really happening, and playing this music for me is sort of just, I don't know, bringing in a little bit of skip in my step as I'm like sweeping the floors of my apartment. So that's what scores do, right? Like
Yes.
obviously enhance the movie and the storytelling, but then even more so than the movie, they develop a life of their own that sort
Hmm.
of, kind of goes along with you in your regular life, because you're not going to watch the movie all over again, when you're out and about things, but the score lives on. Then that's the power of music in general.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, you put on that score, and I feel like I'm going to Hogwarts.
Yeah.
You really it is transportive in that way, and can exist outside of even the film.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. What's your number three?
Cool. So my number three is Kundun, which is a 1997 film directed by Martin Scorsese. The score by Philip Glass. The IMDb plot is from childhood to adulthood, Tibet's 14th Dalai Lama deals with the Chinese oppression and other problems. So this I'll talk a little bit about the film and then get into the score. So this is a Scorsese film I saw at the time in the theater back in '97, and I remember liking the movie, but really like gravitating towards the score. And it's Philip Glass, so it's a very minimalist, using a lot of like Tibetan types of sounds in it. And I was remember thinking, oh, this score is really unique, and they use it a lot over, especially the first act of the film, because it covers the Dalai Lama's life when he's a child and he's found by the monks. There's a lot of silent sequences where there's not a lot of dialogue. So the film relies heavily on the score. And that just left a lasting impression on me. And then, fast forward, maybe it was like a year, I'm at my local library, and that's where I go actually to find a lot of film scores. When I was in high school, I go and like see what they had and then rent it. And then, I had a DVD ripper at the time, so I could then rip the soundtrack and listen to it. And I remember seeing this. I was like, oh yeah, I remember this music being kind of interesting. And I took it home and I ripped the CD and then listened to it. And it really like, not only was it much like the Harry Potter in terms of you're saying, like transporting me back to the film. It was less about that for me. It was more just the movie kind of standing, or the score kind of standing on its own outside of the film in terms of bringing me into the mindset of that like meditative, very introspective mindset. And I started listening to the score like all the time, especially when I was studying, needed to kind of focus. I throw that score on the background because again, it is minimalist. You're not getting too distracted by the music, but it puts me in sort of like the Zen state, which is a lot of what I think Glass was trying to do in the film, where this is obviously about a lot of serious things that Dalai Lama has to contemplate as he grows up and then becomes head of the state, and then the Chinese are threatening the sovereignty of Tibet. So I think that was a lot of the themes that Glass was trying to capture in that. But for me, like this really just sits almost outside of the film in terms of this score for me. Like I've listened to this score way more times than I've ever seen this movie. Actually, I hadn't seen it in years since preparing for this podcast. It was the first time I'd seen it in probably like 20 years, actually. Still, I enjoyed it. I mean, it's beautifully shot. Deakins is one of my favorite cinematographers. Right. He shot this film, but I still couldn't get. I was like almost too hung up on the score, even when I was watching it, because the score means so much to me now. Was kind of interesting. But yeah, for me, I think I had to include this on the list. Not only because it really got me into Philip Glass, who's now one of my favorite composers, but this score for me just is now become something in and of itself outside of even the film. And I think that's something a lot of film scores do for me. It's sort of even if I don't love the movie or watch the movie a lot of the times, I still put the score on, and the score puts me in a particular mood. Like Days of Thunder, The Edge, Assassination of Jesse James. These are all movies I like and I've seen once or twice, but I listen to those scores a lot. And I think that's just the power of the film score, that it can even sometimes survive outside of what the film's even trying to do.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'd never seen this movie until, in preparing for this episode. So it was a good blind spotting because, I do love Scorsese and the people involved. So it was good to kind of come watch this movie. From a pure score standpoint, I was worried going into this because typically whenever Hollywood is trying to, transport you to a different land, especially a different country, the score almost feels like bears the burden of that transportiveness, which could lead into this territory of kind of, very typical sort of kitsch sounds that are, which commercials and sort of popular cinema has kind of created in our minds. This There's a typical sound for the Orient. There's a
Yes.
typical sound for, whatever, right? So I was
Hmm.
sort of very wary of this is how this is probably going to be. But, of course, it's Philip Glass, who's amazing. And of course, it wasn't. I think
Hmm.
the score really felt like it was from the place. It felt, it had a very sort of natural, in the sense, like a nature component to it. You could feel the winds and kind of the majesty of the landscape as it sort of perpetrates through the monasteries and such. It
Hmm.
felt very organic to me, which I don't even know what kind of instruments they used. I'm sure they used very local instruments to create that, but that's the first that really caught me. And that's how I would get transported. It has to feel authentic. It has to
Hmm.
feel lived in, and not just a caricature of a score that you're kind of just imposing on. The other thing that really struck me was, because you're witnessing really a child,
Hmm.
who's sort of born in this very extraordinary circumstance, and this child is sort of going to take on this life of importance, but he's still a child.
Right.
And it was kind of interesting to see the whimsy and the playfulness from a child's point of view, and just the oddity of the situation where the child is just like sitting hours and hours while all these grown-ups are praying around him. That's all in the score, but not
Hmm.
in a, once again, in like a kitschy kind of way where, oh, here's like a little joke, so I'm just going to punctuate that with a score. No, it's very much in the breadth of the majesty of the score and its organicness, but it has these kind of playful tones to it, which I thought were very cool and made me smile just listening to it. But just a beautiful score. I can totally see how this would live beyond the movie, and how this would be your gateway to a zen place and such. So yeah, was happy to see this on the list, was happy to watch the movie. I'm okay on the movie, frankly.
Yeah.
I had
Yeah.
to fast forward a lot of it, which I feel like Scorsese sometimes can, not every movie has to be 3 hours long. So there's a, but I get it, like you're creating a mood, and
Hmm.
watching this at home is probably not the best way to watch this movie. So, but the score was exceptional.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I hadn't seen this movie, like I said, in about 20 years. And for me, like seeing it again, it was almost kind of weird. It's like, oh, yeah, there are images against this score that now is like so
Yeah.
ingrained in me. And yeah, the film is not one of Scorsese's best. It's one of, his couple meditative films on religion, which is not a topic that I typically find that interesting anyway. So I'm not like predisposed. But yeah, it is hard to find though. I mean, they got in a lot of trouble with Chinese government when the film was released. Disney was banned in China for a long time because they allowed this movie to get released. So it is very hard to find, which can be frustrating too. But I love actually your point on it is Philip Glass making a score about a Tibetan person set in Tibet, and that can get very yeah, like kitsch. Like a lot of times when you do these international scores, it sort of becomes, oh well, like you said, like this is the way you would do a certain country. And I think it's surprising that he doesn't go there as much as you might expect, and maybe that's Martin too, kind of leading the way. But yeah, I'm glad I was able to check off one of the Scorsese films you haven't seen. Um,
Yeah, indeed. Okay, so it's my time to go.
yeah, why don't you move to your number two?
All right, so my number two is Black Swan from, let me pull up the date really quickly here, from 2010, directed by Darren Aronofsky, starring Natalie Portman, Mila Kunis, a bunch of other people, scored by Clint Mansell. So this one is on my list for representing how score can really underscore the tonality of a movie. To me, first of all, this score in this movie is kind of my intro into the world of ballet. Like I didn't even know what a Swan Lake score is, so I sort of came in very cold into this. So the score is obviously doing that job of kind of laying out the blueprint and the baseline of what does the ballet score, and specifically in this case the Swan Lake score, is all about. But then it's kind of doing some very interesting tonal things with this score, trying to balance the internal and external horror situations of the lead character as well as this whole ecosystem of ballet, which I thought was very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
On one hand, you have sort of the scares, if you will, that the score elicits, which to me represent the external horrors of what is happening every time Winona Ryder shows up, for example. But then it's being underscored and undercut and further layered with the internal and psychological kind of scares and dilemmas of Natalie Portman. And there's some like really interesting, weird kind of dichotomies that the score is balancing. It's trying to kind of, create this balance between her vulnerability and tenderness because she is that way, but then also balancing her ambition and how she's crossing over to the dark side. There's this balance of reality and as well as this heightened reality, because in her mind, she's literally turning into the black swan, like literally, where feathers are going out of her back. So all that is being handled by the score as well, which once again creates this balance of like unsettling feeling, but also very seductive, because this world is very seductive to her and to the audience as well. So yeah, I was blown away by the score when I watched this movie for the first time. I really hadn't watched the movie ever since until in preparing for this podcast, but I've listened to the score a lot since then. Especially I find myself when I'm in a mood where I'm kind of toying between crossing over to the dark side. Not that I ever do it.
Right.
But this score represents that to me, because it's so like, yeah. So I don't know. It's just a brilliant score. If you remove the score once again from this movie, I don't think the super complex tonality of this movie actually works. It's a different movie totally. Like it would not be this internal and external psychological horror, insecure, ambiguous sort of movie that it ends up being if the score is not there. So pretty brilliant. The movie on rewatch, not as good. Okay.
Oh,
pretty
interesting.
Good.
Okay.
Pretty good, but not the way it was when I watched it the first time, because it hit me like a ton of bricks.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I had actually the exact opposite reaction to this
Really?
film. When I first saw it, I didn't like it. It actually was too hard. It was like hard for me to watch. And then as I saw it, maybe like at least twice in the theater, so I'm a big Aronofsky fan.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden it kind of clicked with me, and then I was like, wow, this movie really is amazing in terms of all the things that it's touching on in terms of like Natalie Portman's character having this the darkness that's inside of her, this other side of her personality that has been suppressed through her mom, and also with herself, not really truly knowing herself, and then that allowed this dark side to kind of take over because she couldn't control it because she was suppressed it for so long. But yeah, the score I found was super interesting too, in the fact that it does take so much from Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake, which I've never seen the ballet, but I'm a big Tchaikovsky fan and had listened to it growing up. I was a big fan of classical music, and he was one of my favorite composers. So I was very familiar with Swan Lake as a ballet, and at least the music. And I thought it was interesting how Clint used that in the score in terms of like changing this music that is, there's obviously horrible parts in the ballet too, and there's some darkness, but he's almost like turned that into like a horror movie score.
Yeah.
And a lot of these movements that I was used to hearing, just, oh, this is some nice kind of relaxing Swan Lake, put it on, like all of a sudden now it's been transformed in the way that he's using it into this like dark kind of, like a score that Bernard Herrmann would do or something for a Hitchcock thriller. And I thought that was really brilliant of how he was bringing in those elements of Tchaikovsky into what this score was doing. And much to your point, fits in very well with the theme of the film too, about unlocking the suppressed darker sides of yourself and then letting that kind of take control over you. And I think the score, when used in those moments where Natalie Portman's character is, fighting against her dark side and how he uses certain aspects of Swan Lake, it is great. It's definitely one of the things that makes this film so interesting to me, at least. And like when recently watching it for this even was actually like, I liked it even more than I did even 10 years ago when I all of a sudden came around to it. I guess I can, once I kind of cracked what the movie was trying to say, it just resonates with me a lot more in terms of the darker sides of yourself and
Right.
knowing yourself better to then a way to control that. Yeah, the score is great. Not one of my favorites of Clint and Aronofsky's partnerships. Fountain, I like one of my favorite collaboration between those two. But this score is also great.
Yeah, it's sort of more about what it's doing for the movie, right? Like I
Hmm.
think creating this tone, and that's sort of what this represents for me. Like this is one of, at least in my memory of the scores that I actually listened to, this is like a
Yeah.
great example of how a score can really change the tonality of the movie and communicate that. All right, so what's your number two?
So my number two film score that shaped my love of film scores was or is The Rock. This is a film 1996 directed by Michael Bay. The score is by Nick Lenny Smith, Hans Zimmer, and Harry Gregson Williams. The log line for the film is a mild-mannered chemist and an ex-con must lead a counterstrike when a rogue group of military men led by a renegade general threaten a nerve gas attack from Alcatraz against San Francisco. Now, this movie, and this is one of the soundtracks I listen to the most, if not the
Really?
most, probably in my entire, yeah, my entire life. But for me, why this is so important is not only because I love this score, but it really showed me at the time when I first saw this film, I really recognized the score and how was able to heighten the film. And so I saw this movie for the first time on VHS, maybe like a year after it came out and fell in love with the film. I mean, I could talk for hours about how brilliant this movie is. I mean, one of the best action movies ever made. But the key scenes in the film are really elevated to me in terms of that excitement factor by what they're able to do with the score. It's the first time I was starting to recognize too how, even a simple action movie like this could have a score that does a lot of work to elevate the material instead of just be something kind of on in the background where you're looking at the explosions, you're looking at the action scene, and the music is just part of that as opposed to a main part of that is kind of driving that action forward. It was also one of the films that got me into recognizing Hans Zimmer and that type of film score. I was very much obsessed with the more like John Williams, like full orchestral score, and less of this score, which mixes a lot of electronic music, guitar into it. So this is something that was all new for me, and now he's one of my favorite film composers. But really, for me, it's like how it elevates the action. Even to the point where my friends in college, we would put the score on and reenact scenes from the movie
Oh
along
my
with the
God.
score, especially the pivotal scene at the end, which also is one of my favorite scenes from any film. At the end of the movie, when Nicolas Cage has defeated the bad guys, and now he has to crawl out of Alcatraz onto the shore and signal the military to not bomb Alcatraz because the enemy is defeated. The way the score is used in that sequence it makes it so powerful, along with Michael Bay's direction. And we would reenact that green smoke scene. We'd throw the soundtrack on. One of us would play like the fighter pilot. One of us would be like Nick Cage. We'd be able to recite all the dialogue. That's how much this score meant to me. But yeah,
And you would play the score while you were
oh yeah,
enacting the scene.
yeah. Play the
Oh my
score. We'd
God.
say someone's shouting green smoke, someone else is like jumping down like as the explosion happens. Yeah, this was in college. This is what I did. I was a nerd. But yeah, this score, like I think I played this score more than any other score. Maybe my number one, which I'll get to, that might be more than that. But yeah, this score unlocked again my love of Hans Zimmer and really showed me how a score in an action movie that might just be like quote unquote a dumb action movie could be elevated by the score. Though again, I think the film is not just a dumb popcorn film. But to me, this score had to be on this list, if not number one. But I had to put it in number two.
Yeah, I watched this movie when it came out, and I remember really loving it, really enjoying it. It sort of felt like, kind of what Hollywood movie, especially from that generation, represents, like big
Mm-hmm.
blockbuster action, big stars, and what have you. The score was a big part of it. I had not watched this movie since. I had not listened to score since until like a few weeks ago. And the score is incredible. I will say that. I think the way at least my brain understands like big Hollywood movie scores,
Hmm.
this is kind of what it is, but it's not just slumming it. Like there's a lot of work that's happening, like you said. So I really appreciated that. To quote what you said, it really elevates the material,
Hmm.
which is kind of, my backhanded way of saying that the movie now watching it, I couldn't get through half of it. And then I just
Really?
had to quit.
Because of it was you were bored by it?
No, just, I don't know, just felt so cheesy to me. And I don't know. And maybe I need to watch it on a different night when I'm in the mood for
Yeah.
something like that, which is kind of popcorny and fun or what have you. But it just felt really cheesy off its time, which
Mm.
I totally acknowledge, but wasn't really into the movie. But I was into the score for sure. And I part of me was like, why is the score on this movie? Because the score is way better than the movie. But maybe I'm being a little too harsh on it. Maybe I need to watch it another time when I'm in the mood for something like that.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
I
I
will
think
not take away from the score. The score
yeah,
is
yeah. I mean, I think we again could get into a whole discussion, and I could make a very thought out argument on why I think this is the best action movie that has ever been made.
really wow.
When I rewatched it again for this, because I maybe it's been a year since I've seen it. I mean, every time I watch it, it's just like more layers get revealed, and more of just the craft that was put into this. Definitely Michael Bay's masterpiece. But yeah, getting back to the score, it does though heighten a lot of things, bring a lot of pathos. There's a lot of work done on the characters, especially the Ed Harris's villain character, and the theme that they give him is not one of a villain theme. It's more like a tragic hero theme
Oh,
because he's not really a villain. Like he is basically taking over Alcatraz and threatening to gas San Francisco because he's felt betrayed by the American government because they've mistreated Marines over the years. So
mhm.
it's coming from some sense of honor. He's not just some terrorist psychopath. And
Yeah.
what the score that or the theme that they give him is one of this. It's almost like a tragic hero theme, which really adds to him. Especially when he dies, there's a big swell of that theme, and you really feel for him. I think a lot through the score and Ed Harris's performance, which is fantastic. But I do think the score helps add a lot of those elements into the film that in a typical action movie, it might just be something you would just write off. Oh, this is some crazy villain. And, we just have to get to the set piece of Alcatraz and a hostage and some, gas attack. And that's all that the movie would care about. But I think this movie is so grounded in its characters that, and the score, I think, does add to that. So at the very least, I'm not saying you have. We should watch this movie together first
I
of
was just
all,
gonna
and
say
I can
that we
talk
should
you
watch
through
this
it.
movie together.
But
That's the way to do it.
at the very least, just go on YouTube and rewatch because you might not have gotten to this yet. That final sequence
Okay.
that is again probably one of my top 10 favorite sequences in any movie. It's fantastic, and the score is a huge part of that.
Well,
But yeah, I'm a huge. I will always push the rock on anyone.
I two words that I never thought I would hear in one sentence is Michael Bay and masterpiece. So
Well, yeah, I
that's
mean, I will remind you, like this was back too, like before Transform. I mean, he was one of my favorite directors up until Pearl Harbor and then Transformers, and now, I'm not a big fan of his films, but no, he was a very important action voice in the '90s. This and Bad Boys, I think, are
true.
two just fantastic films. But yeah, not so much anymore. He's definitely fallen off of my list.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
All right.
Great. So yeah, let's get to your number one now. Score.
Okay, so my number one is this movie called Far From Heaven from 2002, directed by Todd Haynes, starring Julianne Moore, Dennis Quaid, a whole bunch of other people, score by Elmer Bernstein. So this score and why I have this at number one, or really why I have it on the list, is to me, this score is all about mood. So to recap, my first was score, sense of place, then score, sense of tone. This is sense of mood for me. And I think if you watch the movie, and maybe I should kind of give a quick log line for people who haven't watched it. It's basically in 1950s Connecticut, a flustered housewife faces a marital crisis and mounting racial tensions in the outside world. But well, I won't give away too much for people who haven't watched the movie, because people should watch this movie. I think
Definitely.
it's
Yeah,
brilliant.
it is.
But I think why I call out mood here is because this score is trying to do this heavy lifting job of kind of representing these ironic themes that are playing across the entire movie, where on one hand you have this really immaculate Connecticut, beautiful, set in the fall place where everything is seemingly perfect on the outside. But then in the inside lives of people, where there's prejudice, there's bigotry, there is, a lot of heartbreak involved, especially in the lead characters' lives, you constantly see that sort of dichotomy, that irony in the score, which on surface can sort of feel very lush and grand, because it is an homage to the scores from the 50s. The movie's an homage to Douglas Sirk movies from way back when. So it is doing that, but it's sort of undercutting it with this really interesting internal dilemma and crises that the people in the movie are facing. On the same level, this sort of dichotomy and irony between love that can sometimes come with judgment, or another ironic kind of note is betrayal can come with sense of pleasure and mystery, because one of the lead characters has a whole secret life that's then squared in the movie. And it's really interesting to watch those scenes where, yes, there's betrayal that's happening that he's causing Julianne Moore's character, but there's also this, voyeuristic sense that is heightened by the score, where there's a sense of pleasure and mystery and almost seductiveness that's portrayed, but it's also at the same time dark and bad, because its impact on Julianne Moore is not good, obviously. So yeah, I don't know. I go back to the score when I want this sense of mood from a movie, but also in my life. It's beautifully done. In general, you can listen to it, whenever. I also love that we talked about themes earlier. Here too, there's like one single theme, but unlike Harry Potter, where that theme plays as it is in the entire movie, here that same theme is kind of messed up with to represent the different ironies that I just talked about. You can see the same version of that theme on the soundtrack like 6 times to just represent the different ironies, the different stakes of the movies, which I think is brilliant. And this score to me also is my gateway to scores of the past, because I really didn't grow up watching a lot of older movies, but watching this movie, listening to the score made me want to seek out, all the greats from all the Hitchcock movies, like you referenced as well, and many other people. So I owe a lot to the score to kind of bring me to that world. But just in general, it's just a brilliant score. And I just think so much of what the score has to do for a movie is set the mood for it. And to me, mood is a little bit different from tone, which we talked about earlier, which I just think the score does such a brilliant job.
Yeah, though first off, I love this film. I saw it when it came out, and I felt it was not to compare to American Beauty, a film I don't really like and I think hasn't aged well, but it's like a successful version of what that film was trying to do, which is kind of peel back a facade of something that on face value looks like everything's fine, but actually, they're far from heaven in terms of things are not as well as they seem. But I love that you chose this, actually, because when I rewatched this film, I was paying attention to the score, and the score is doing so much of that lifting of that juxtaposition that I mentioned, the theme of the film. And I haven't seen this film in a while, but I really liked it when I saw it, but I didn't remember I wonder why you picked this. I wasn't like a memorable score for me. But then watching the movie with the score in mind, it's like, wow, the score is doing so much of juxtaposing, this classic, 1950s perfect quote unquote life, themes that could have played in films that portrayed domestic life as very pleasant and nice and great. And that's what the score is doing, but the film is doing something totally different. And it kind of heightens then that that irony or that dichotomy between appearance and reality. The score is doing that so brilliantly. So now I was like, oh, okay, now I can really see why. Yeah, not only why the score is brilliant, and I think this might have been Elmore Bernstein's last score before he died, who's Great Escape, Magnificent Seven. I mean, he's done some of the best movie scores of all time. And I think it's interesting that Todd Haynes, who's the director of this film, chose him to do this. And I think it's because he wanted a classic Hollywood composer that could deliver a classic 50s score juxtaposed to these themes that obviously were going on in the 50s. I mean, all this stuff was going on back then. It just wasn't reflected in media. And I think that's what Todd Haynes was trying to do. But again, I almost saw this movie in a new way, having paid more attention to the music and really appreciate not only the soundtrack being brilliant, but the film too. The performances from Dennis Quaid and Julianne Moore, and this movie is just fantastic. Definitely my favorite Todd Haynes film. I love it.
So it's my yearly movie. There's some movies that I watch every year. This is on the list for sure. Because we talk a lot about mise en scène, right? Like this is not a movie which every department is just like firing on all cylinders, which is amazing. But I'm so happy to hear you love the movie and you like the score as well.
Yeah. I mean, again, this. Thanks for putting this on the list, because I remembered liking the movie, but I wasn't really paying attention to exactly what Elmer was doing. And now I'm like, wow, like this score really is a lot of part of that, like you said, mise en scène of every department kind of hitting on that theme, that one unified theme. Yeah. But a score is such an important part of a film that I just had newfound respect for what he was able to do with this film.
Yeah. All right. Well, what's your number one?
So my number one is a film that I could talk about this movie with every single theme I think we've talked about so far, because it has such a large impact on my life and my love of film, but that's Star Wars. So the original Star Wars from 1977, directed by George Lucas, score by John Williams. The IMDb plot thread for the 0 people who've never heard of this film: Luke Skywalker joins forces with a Jedi Knight, a cocky pilot, a Wookiee, and 2 droids to save the galaxy from the Empire's world-destroying battle station, while also attempting to rescue Princess Leia from the mysterious Darth Vader. So for me, and this is kind of the case with a lot of different things with Star Wars, actually, but this was the first movie that made me really understand like what a film score was. Who are composers? What do they do? This is John Williams, my introduction to him. I mean, it's not like I can actually remember the first time I saw this movie. I've seen this movie so many times over the course of my entire life. It's like always been with me. But this was the first soundtrack that I ever bought. I mean, I know we're not on a video podcast, but I actually have the record behind me that, maybe I'll show you after this, that I bought when I was a kid, of a record of this soundtrack that I play all the time. I transferred it to tape. But I think my love of this movie opened up a world to me of what were all the different aspects of filmmaking? Like, why do I love this so much? And the score is a major part of it. I mean, even George Lucas famously credits John Williams with making this film work. There's so many things, moments in this movie where the score is doing all of the lifting. Not only kind of some of it are adding to it, but, the famous scene of Luke Skywalker looking off into with the twin sunsets, and he's this farm boy who's dreaming of more, and like, what can my life be? And I'm too big for this farm life. The score is what is saying that. And then for me too, talking about The Rock with one of my favorite sequences of all time being the end of that film, definitely top 3 or 2 maybe for me in terms of movie sequences is the final Death Star trench run at the end when the X-Wing fighters are attacking the Death Star to blow it up. And so much of that excitement and energy is through the music. If you watch this film silently, I think a lot of the more problems with the film could come out in terms of the more stage direction or not incredible acting or dialogue. If you remove the music, this movie becomes less. Not that this movie isn't perfect in every way, which it is. I'm not trying to knock Star Wars, but what John Williams did here is just really, really very important to the success of this film and to the emotion of the film. He is really that emotion that carries through this entire film. But again, like for me, this was the beginning of my love of film score. Started with John Williams, then would buy the Jaws soundtrack, Indiana Jones, E.T., like all of the greatest films that I loved as a kid were all scored by him. But it was this movie and appreciating this soundtrack that really started my whole love affair with scores to begin with. I don't think I'd have a collection of hundreds of movie scores and be such a fanatic around this component of filmmaking if it wasn't for John Williams and if it wasn't for Star Wars. So I can't speak enough. I mean, I've seen this film live in concert with an orchestra being played against the film, and a lot of the people are there just as much to hear the music be played live than to watch the film. And I've seen John Williams in concert ever since I was a little boy. I mean, he was a conductor of the Boston Pops when I was growing up, so it was easy for me to then see him live, and he played the music live. I mean, I can't. It definitely shaped a lot of my life, shaped through this particular score.
I didn't know that he was in Boston. That sounds incredible.
Yeah, he would conduct the Pops. It was see him all the time and in concerts. And of course he'd play this. You can't leave a John Williams concert unless he plays the Star Wars theme. So
no. I mean, honestly, I don't know what more I could add than what you already said and what, every person on this planet or maybe other planets have said about this.
There you go.
But yeah, I mean, another one, a force to be reckoned with for sure. Yeah, I mean, I put Harry Potter in there because I have sort of more of a personal connection to it. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to the grammar of film scores, this is it, I think, in my mind too. Like if somebody were to stop me on the street and just say, "Oh, name one movie score," mm-hmm. This would be it. And I think this would be it for probably most people, which is incredible that not only that John Williams created this, but he's credited with so many more of scores that are not that far behind from this score. But I think this is sort of the pinnacle. There's no question about that. My favorite memory of listening to the score is, I feel like at Disneyland, you're in some of the Star Wars theme. I haven't seen the new one, but even the other ones that exist there, when you're waiting in line and the score plays and you get this sense of like excitement and giddiness and, that feeling that you're going to shoot off to another place. Mm-hmm. I can't even put that into words, but I remember that feeling. But that's the power of the score. You're not even watching the movie, you're just in the environment of the movie, but the score does all the work.
Right.
Kind of put you in that front seat, right there, right then. So yeah, it's just brilliant. So I mean, no dispute here for this being at your number one.
Yeah, I mean, really too, he influenced, he kind of brought back that large orchestral score from 30s and 40s Hollywood back into vogue. And I think probably the rest of the items, the composers on our list, or at least the films on our list, probably wouldn't have had such orchestral heavy scores if it wasn't for what he did and sort of bringing that back. That was not in vogue at all at the time. You watch other films from the 70s and it definitely were not. You can tell like the post Star Wars John Williams and the pre-Star Wars John Williams just in terms of film scores. I mean, I think I'm glad we also got to talk about Williams at the beginning of the episode, and now here we're back at the end. I mean, I think that does show that modern film scores, or at least when we were growing up, it starts and ends with what Williams did.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's our top three, I guess. So any honorable mentions, that stuff that you were considering and didn't make it on your list?
Yeah, I mean, this one was tough. I mean, I literally could put every Williams score, but those aside, Titanic, Inception, Gettysburg, Gladiator, Ghost in the Darkness, and Third Man are another really important set of scores for me.
Cool.
What about you?
I had Gladiator as well. I put Vertigo, Imitation Game, Sicario, and then Jackie.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And I know we were talking a little bit about sort of, and maybe we can spend a minute on this, like how do you feel about scores like now? But I've actually been pretty intrigued and excited by the new crop of film composers that are coming in and sort of, they're kind of in the middle. Like they're not minimalistic scores. They are kind of large, feel like orchestral scores, but they're messing around with it a little bit. That's why I put something like Jackie in there, or even Ghost in the Shell, or what was the other Scarlett Johansson movie where she's like an alien? Also another Mika Levy score, I think. She's the one who
Yes.
did the score for Jackie as well. But
Hmm.
this is just a lot of great, interesting instruments that are off the beaten path, and playing a lot with tone and mood, less around themes. And I know you love themes, and I do too. But I equally, and maybe sometimes given the context of the movie, love a score that's actually not theme based and
Hmm.
just evokes a certain mood and a tone and really complements the storytelling and elevates it or like shines a different light on it. So I love what some of these folks have been doing. Obviously, every Johnny Greenwood score probably
Oh
is
yeah.
that, which
Hmm.
is, amazing. Johan Johannesson, who did the score for Sicario and some of Denis Villeneuve's movie, who's no longer with us, which is
Hmm.
very sad, did some of that kind of stuff too, like just interesting and different. But then there's also Hans Zimmer, who, even though plays in the old milieu of like orchestral sound, was constantly experimenting with weird instruments and weird sounds and creating these like transportive, larger than life kind of soundscapes, which is
Hmm.
amazing. Like Dune, obviously, even this year. So
Hmm.
I don't know. What do you think about scores lately, and who are some of your favorite composers these days?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting point you bring up around theme because that definitely, when the age of John Williams, 80s, 90s, a movie themes were very important to the movies that I liked. And that was what kind of gravitated me towards the scores that I liked were because they were so theme heavy. And then that started to shift really in the 2000s away from that more in times of a like a Philip Glass kind of just building atmosphere and less around themes of characters. I actually even remember the first time I saw Batman Begins, which Hans Zimmer was one of the, and James Newton Howard did the score for that film. And I remember it being very weird to me that I was like, where's the Batman? There's no Batman theme here. They didn't do a theme. What's going on? And I actually remember being like disappointed in the score actually when I first saw that film. Though now it's one of my favorite scores and I kind of understand what they were doing. Were just kind of notes and a mood that they were creating around the characters, and less about a straight up theme like what Danny Elfman did with Burton's Batman. And I think that just shows like just the evolution of the medium into this new space that is a lot more about creating moods and less about themes you can kind of hang your hat on and like telegraph to the audience, oh, well, here's this hero's theme and we're going to play it at the heroic moments. And if you hear this theme, that means this character is coming or this conflict is happening between these two characters because of this theme. It's a lot more about that mood and meditativeness that I liked in like the Kundun score that we talked about. So I think it is definitely a transition period again. John Williams is not composing much anymore. It's like, okay, he'll do a Spielberg movie, but basically that's it. And even like Hans Zimmer, even though he started out with a lot of major themes in the 80s and 90s, and those scores is now much more meditative, which I think is interesting to your point.
I love it.
And I think it's just a of evolution of the medium, but then also just of film. I think it reflects how people consume the media now. They can tell like deeper stories that are less about the specific character archetypes. And I think maybe that the scores kind of fits into that, which is, one of the reasons why I'm so, disappointed about the Oscar announcement this week is when we're recording this episode, they just announced there's a bunch of awards they're pulling from live broadcasts and instead are going to film them earlier in the night and then kind of edit them in. And film scores are one of those awards. And I just feel that that's a slap in the face to the community, but also that sort of devaluing the importance that film score plays in movies. I think we all the films we talked about today, would you take the score away, the movie is much less. And it's not just background music. It's not a temp track. These are artists that are adding to what these films are trying to represent. Even something as silly as The Rock, you take that score away and, the movie doesn't work as well. It just kind of shocked to me, honestly, that they actually did this, first of all, and that they did this with something as major as film score. I just think is really, really sad.
Terrible and sad. And it sort of shows, at least to me, that maybe they don't understand the role the score plays. That's what it sort of smells of, which is obviously not true. I'm sure they do, but yeah, puzzling to me for sure why they've done this. But yeah, I guess that said, still excited for the award.
Yes.
Some great contenders this year. I'm yet to watch Parallel Mothers, which I really want to watch because I do love Almodovar quite a bit. And that score, I've heard really good things about it.
Me too.
But everything else on the list is amazing. I would be happy with any of them, frankly, to take home the prize, even though we will not see it live.
I know. Well, maybe by the time this episode is posted, they'll kind of walk it back. They're getting a lot of flack for this.
They're getting a lot of flack for this.
But you never know. I mean, even to your point too about, young, new up and coming composers, I feel like this is sort of a slap in the face to them that it's harder for them to get their, fame and notoriety if they're not part of this this award and given the same weight. It's kind of like devaluing them as they're trying to come up and totally. Do something interesting.
Totally. Well, on that note,
get it? Note? Are you trying to make a joke? I can't tell if there was a potential or not, but it's a good. Okay, well, it's a good note to end on then.
Exactly. Well, that's our episode. We'll be here next time talking about, I guess, the Oscar show. But until then, please rate us or subscribe or review us, all the things you do wherever you listen to us. But I also wanted to say that, as you guys have been seeing, we've been adding things to our podcast, one of them being a score in the beginning. So we really appreciate all your support so far and would love more and more so more people can listen to us idiots talk about movies. Thank you very much.
Great. Bye.
All right. Bye.